Hi there, I am always so thankful when you stop by. This is Jennifer. So today is all about multi-inking stamps, how to get multiple colors with a stamped image. I'll share how to do this with solid stamps and also with outline stamps. I have a few different techniques for each. I'm hoping that this gives you a new way of looking at your stamps and the different results that you can get. These are quite simple and it really can work with a variety of stamp styles. Let's get started with these colorful flowers. I'm first going to show you how to do masked inking. For most of my cards today, I'm using this really great stamp set from Reverse Confetti called Sunny Flower. I love the style of this. It has the outline and then these building images that you can use in different ways. And there are coordinating dies available to go with it. I also like the sentiments in this one. This is one of those that I'll reach for often. I plan to make a bunch of cards with this today, so I've done a bunch of die cutting off screen of the flower, leaves, and the centers of the flowers, but you could do this technique if you plan to make only one card. I have my MISTI stamping tool with the sticky mat inside, and then I have the negative space. I did it from black so I could see it, of the flower leaves and flower centers. I'm using this to do mass stamping, do a bunch of stamping at once. So I'm lining up the flower with that opening. So the flower stamp is lined up with the opening. I can pop in the first die cut to stamp on. Since I've never used this stamp before, I'm rubbing it with a dry cloth just to kind of prep it. It'll take the ink better. This first technique is very simple. It'll allow us to create these flowers that are two colors. We'll step it up on our next example and show you how you can get really creative with this. Now for this, I'm using Gina K Designs Masking Magic masking paper. You can use any that you want. The reason I prefer this is that it will take a lot of ink. You can stamp on it many, many times before it starts to kind of seep through. In fact, I've never had it seep through, but other thinner masking papers sometimes will allow that ink to go through over time. So that's why I like to use this particular one. Now first, I'm creating my mask. I'm stamping on that with the flower with whatever ink you want. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Saturated Inks today. Now I'm cutting this in half. Now this is a pretty simple image. You could make this with maybe a leaf where you have like a curved line across the center, or with the flower where you do each petal different. Totally up to you. I'm just cutting that mask between some of the petals. So now I'll put this half of the mask down over the stamped flower. I can line up the stamping on the mask with the edge of the die cut. So you'll see I just line that up there. Very quick, very simple. Now we can stamp the flower on top of this, and we'll end up with ink only on the left-hand side of the white die cut. I'm putting the colors of Simon Says Stamp Saturated Inks on the screen in case you're interested. Now we can wipe off that stamp, remove the mask, and then add the next die cut in and create another. Again, I'm making multiples because I plan to make several cards today, but you could just do one if you prefer. I could have just used a straight piece of tape and not cut along it and just kind of cut the flower in half, but this gave better results. I tried that first. So it allows me to get 4 petals to be one color and 3 petals to be another. I will show you a faster way of getting a multicolored image in a little bit, but this one is fun if you want to get kind of a crisp graphic look. All right, so now I'm putting the other mask on the other half and stamping with a different color. I'm going to end up with kind of a rainbow of flowers going across my card. So this is the yellow and orange flower. All right, so now I can lift up that mask and then put the other die cut under it and repeat this. Now the reason I wipe that mask off each time is the masking magic has like a slick surface, and I don't want that ink to spread. The advantage of that slick surface is that it doesn't allow the ink to absorb through. If you've ever used a piece of masking paper too many times, the ink will sometimes go through onto your project and it can be frustrating. All right, so now I'm moving on to the next color. Going back to that same first mask, I'll ink up my stamp with another color and stamp that half. Then we'll do that on other die cuts, of course. Then we'll switch to the other mask and another color to again give us 2 colors on one flower. If you do not have masking paper, you can also just tape down a piece of printer paper that maybe you cut down to the shape that you want, and just put pieces of tape on the edges. You can also use Post-it notes, but those won't hold up as much over time, so you might have to remake them if you do a lot of stamping. Okay, so now we have a pink and purple flower, and then finally, I'll just show this quickly, I have a flower that has blues on it. So we did some bright blue and some teal. This stamp set has some simple layering images. I actually don't call them layering, I call them building, because you don't have to get it just right. It doesn't have to be layered in any particular way. It's just images you can stamp on top of each other to add to the look of dimension or just add some interest. So this one does like kind of a star coming out from the center, I guess you would say. And I'm again using the same mask. Noticed it's been inked up a lot. It doesn't matter. And I'm stamping half with a slightly darker color of teal on this one. Then we'll do the other half with a slightly darker blue ink. So again, I'm doing two colors. I'm doing just darker of whatever color is stamped behind it. If you don't have an ink that is darker than your original color, you could instead maybe clear heat emboss here, which will make it look darker, or you could do white ink here, and it would make it look softer there. I wanted the leaves to have the same kind of look, so I'll do two different colors of green on it using masking for the multi-inking. So this is another piece of masking paper, and I'm just stamping the leaf quickly onto here, and then I'm cutting that leaf in half. I just kind of want half of this piece to be one color and half to be another color. You could make this however you want. In fact, you could do each leaf a different color, which I'll show you a little bit later. So now I'm putting in a white die cut here, and I have my stamp all lined up with that opening. I'm stamping it first with a lighter color. This is the Limalicious. It's a great color. Then I'm putting the mask down, and I'll stamp the rest of this here, the unmasked area, with a darker green. So this time, instead of doing half one color, half the other, I'm starting with stamping it all a light green, and then just half of it on top of that with a darker green. This works really well if you're using light and dark of the same color. So now that has a two-tone effect, kind of like our flowers do. Now for the flower centers, there are a few options in this set. I decided to stamp the larger one and the smaller one and layer them together, just to give more color to my flower and more layers. So this one I'm stamping with caramel ink. This one is from Hero Arts. Their core inks are just beautiful, have a lot of great colors that fit into some of the gaps in my other collections. Don't feel like you have to buy all of one ink collection from a company or have to just use one ink collection at a time. Mix and match your inks. It doesn't matter at all. Go for whatever color you're looking for. Now for this smaller one, I stamped it in caramel, and then there's this building image that looks like little marks or little details that I'm stamping on top with Cup of Joe ink, which is a slightly darker brown ink. Okay, so now let's assemble our flowers. You can see I have all these flowers that are two-tone, like half is one color, half is another color. You could even do more contrast in your flower, but I wanted to line these up on my card in a rainbow. So that's why I did pink and purple, orange and yellow, teal and blue, and we'll add some green flowers. I am gluing die cuts together here for some dimension. So I'm gluing one solid white die cut behind our stamped die cut and then gluing them all together. I like to do that on my cards, especially if I'm going to put it through the mail, and some of these will be overlapping. By gluing two die cuts together, they'll be stronger and less likely to bend or crease in the mail. Before we turn these flowers into cards, I wanted to show you another way of doing multi-inking with masking with this particular image, the same stamp set. I think it's good to see a few different options. In this case, we're going to get a little more creative with our inking, so each petal is a different color. This is a great way to step up a simple image. So I'm starting out by stamping that flower onto a piece of masking paper. I will then pop in one of my white die cuts and stamp the flower onto it with this light pink ink. All of my petals will be a shade of pink, so I can do this. You could skip that step if you want to, and if all of your petals will be a completely different color. Now from that mask, I'm cutting out one of the petals, just so there's one petal missing. I will then line up that mask with my flower, and we will stamp onto this, which will allow us to only stamp onto our die cut that one petal. So I can make each petal a different color this way. Now you'll notice here that I didn't really need to create a mask to be able to mask off each of these petals. I can instead just use a piece of tape or a straight edge because of this particular design. But say you have a more complicated design and you want different areas to be different colors. This is the best way to do that, to create a mask that you stamp onto, so only certain areas are a certain color. There is another way to do this multi-inking technique with a mask, and that is to put the mask on your stamp and ink over it and then stamp with that. I don't recommend that. I think this is much easier unless you're using an acrylic block. If you're using an acrylic block, put your stamp onto your block, then put the mask over the stamp and ink over that. Then remove the mask and stamp onto your paper. But if you have a stamping tool like this is definitely much easier. So instead of using that mask and cutting off each petal, I realized with this design of the flower, I could just use these two little straight edges of some masking paper to mask off the area and stamp each petal a different color. So play around with what works with whatever image you're using. I will be honest, I loved this flower with all the different color pinks. I think it'd be fun to use some more reds and pinks and make this a poinsettia for Christmas. Then you could also do a rainbow of petals around it if you wanted to. A lot of ways you can use this technique to get multicolor images. It really steps it up because if you just stamp as is, you just have one color. This gives you so many more options. Another fun reason to do this, where I'm using shades of pinks, is I get to know my inks a little bit better. Which color pinks work well together? If I find two shades work really well together, I will sometimes put a little post-it note on the back of the ink pad, like saying this carnation ink works really well with this taffy ink. That way you can mix and match your inks as much as you want. All right, now I'm stamping that center image just with a dark pink. I'm not going to mask that one off. Now we have the leaves. I've stamped them already with a green ink. And now I'm just using pieces of masking paper or tape just to mask off one of the leaves. I now will stamp over that with one color of green that's darker. Then I will do the same with another leaf using another green color. So this is, again, another way to use all your inks, even the ones that you don't use very often. Sometimes when I do something like this, I'll remember how much I like a particular ink color, but may have forgotten that I have. All right, so there we have our three-toned leaves. All right, let's do another form of multi-inking with the same image. I really wanted to show you multiple ways so you can see the different looks you get. This gives a more blended look. There are many ways you can do this, but this one definitely works the best. So I have my die cut in there and I have my stamp. This time the way I'm applying ink is with a blending brush. I'm dabbing the brush into the ink and then dabbing it onto my stamp and stamping that repeatedly. And notice how I'm getting a blended look. I am making sure that the ink goes past the halfway point because remember when you're blending inks, you want them to overlap. So I did the pink past the halfway point. Now on the bottom, I'm putting a purple ink. And by the way, I'm using the same colors as before. I'll continue to do this until I get a nice blend there in the middle. This is a wonderful way to get a blended look between any inks. I really like this with solid images like this one or even background stamps. You could do an ombre for a background using a background stamp and just blending softer inks to darker inks, or do a rainbow on a background too. Here I'm doing the yellow on top and that grapefruit color towards the bottom, allowing them to overlap. This little layered image is a bit small to use the blending brush. You could still do it, but in this case, I'm just inking up half of the stamp one color and half of the stamp the other color and stamping that. Since it's so small and detailed, the blending really isn't necessary, but you could do it if you wanted to, or if the colors were very different. Say you were blending from a pink to a blue. If you have never tried to ink up your stamp with different colors using a blending brush, I encourage you to do so. And you could use other inking tools if you don't have a blending brush. Use whatever you have on hand. I like this idea of multi-inking with the blending brush so much that I wanted to show you a few more ways to do it. In this case, I'm stamping the flower with yellow. Then I will use a blending brush just to add a red color to the center. This is a great way to get a blending like in certain areas on your image. Last time I did half and half, but this time I'm just making the center of the flower a different color. This is one of those techniques where you'll want to do it a few times to build up the color if you want it to be bold, because you're not going directly to the stamp with the ink pad and you're instead using a brush. Remember, if you have a smaller tip brush like this one, you could get color into smaller areas, so I'm making it darker red there towards the center. This is, again, another great way you can step up these solid stamp images like this one. So I did a few more of these off screen. You can see the two-tone colors. I used a lot of the same inks I showed you earlier. Now for the center part, instead of doing a blending with this, I wanted to show you that you can use white ink. This just stands out nice and crisp against the color behind it. So if you're ever looking for a different look for your layering or building stamps, try doing white ink on top. It really gives fun results. We can't forget the leaves. In this case, I'll stamp the leaf with a solid green, and then I will apply a darker green kind of towards the base of the leaf with the blending brush. This gives me a nice kind of gradient of color from darker to lighter at the top. Before we move on to how to do multi-inking with outline images, let's complete all of these flowers into cards and projects. Now I have a few projects here. 2 of them use the reverse confetti background dies that you see here. On the left we have the pointed die, and on the right we have the Deco cover die. I really like dies like this. You've probably seen me use them in videos because they add detail to a solid white background, and you could ink them and do many different things with them. It's a great way to add texture and detail. So I cut this one from white cardstock and glued it onto a white note card, and we'll add our flowers on top. And I'll do the same with the other background die for another of my cards. And for another, I'll be using the reverse confetti Circle of Hearts background die. So there are a bunch of different ones from reverse confetti. These are 3 of my staples that I seem to reach for a lot. This one's fun also if you want to put different little flowers or little die cuts in the center of each of the circles. Also, all of those little hearts that pop out are fun to add into shaker cards or to use on accents on your cards. I'm just gluing 2 together from white cardstock and then gluing it to a white note card. By doing the 2 together, it helps the pattern kind of stand out since everything is white on white. Now we can add our flowers. Once again, as I mentioned before, behind each of my stamped flowers, I'm gluing an additional die cut just so it's a bit stronger. It also adds some fun dimension. And I'm gluing my flowers so it kind of looks like a rainbow going up the card, and then we can add some leaves. I use liquid adhesive so that I can wiggle things around until I like the placement. And I also can lift things while it's still wet to slide the leaves under. This is Gina K Connect liquid adhesive in a fine tip bottle, which is definitely my favorite go-to adhesive right now. It dries super strong and clear. So I finished this card up by tucking some leaves in place and adding a sentiment strip. This sentiment strip is white heat embossed on black cardstock, and the sentiment is included in that same Sunny Flower stamp set. I also added some Trinity Stamps confetti to the background. These are just little flat sequins that have an iridescent shine to them. Now you can see here I have the 2-tone flowers, so half of it is one color and half is the other. I did that by doing the masking for that multi-ink effect. Here is the one where I did the blending between the 2 inks. So I used all the same inks, all the same design, but this one on the right has a blended look. It's just a different option. The first one is a little more graphic. This one's a little bit softer, I guess you would say. So you could try both depending on the style of the stamps you're using. You can see how I have the detail added in the white background thanks to the background dies that I used. I was able to make a 3rd card, and you can see it here. Now on one of these cards, I cut the pieces that are hanging off the edge, the one on the left. The one on the right, I left the flowers and leaves hanging off the edge, but that means it can't fit into a regular A2 envelope. That pink one is an A2 envelope for a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card. The white envelope is A6, which is slightly bigger and only requires the same postage. So if you want things to hang off your A2 card, you can definitely use the A6 envelope. Here's another card that I made with my flowers and leaves. This one is a horizontal or landscape card, and I use that Circle of Hearts background die. I shifted my sentiment towards the bottom of my card and the flowers and leaves towards the top. Again, I white heat embossed Just Saying Hello on black cardstock. I love the style of letters there. I think it fits really nicely on a sentiment strip. And that's a sentiment that works for many different occasions. I still have my favorite of the multi-ink flowers left over, so we can use those on these little projects. This includes the one where I did different petals, different colors of pink, and the blended towards the center. For these, I'm using a really fun die from Reverse Confetti that creates these little fold up, I guess not pockets, little holders, I don't know what you would call them. But what's really neat about this is you can put a little mini card inside and then decorate the outside however you want. You just die cut it from whatever cardstock you want and then fold it along the score lines, and look at this little folder that you have. Now these are great for giving to someone on the spot or gluing onto the front of a card. For the little card on the inside, I create a piece that is 5 1/4 by 2 5/8, and I score it 2 5/8. You could do a little bit smaller if you wanted to. So now I have a little mini card for the inside. All you have to do is tuck each of the corners into these little notches on the inside and then close it up. There is a stamp set available that is just the right size to stamp on that little card in the inside, but you could also use any sentiment stamps you have. I like this one because it has a variety of sentiments included. The reason I really like this die that holds the little note is it's something that you can easily hand to someone. So say you are at a doctor's office and a nurse is really kind to you. Something like this would be fun to just go and hand them. I will give things like this to delivery people or someone at the grocery store. I'll keep them in my purse. Yes, I do this. It makes me happy. I feel like in a world where there's so much that isn't happy, things like this can make me really happy. So, you do whatever it takes, right? And I plan to make some of these for my kids to put in their lunch boxes. All right, so I'm adding one of my multi-inked petaled flowers to the front. These are the pink ones that I like so much, along with the little leaves. And then this is something I could either glue on the front of a card or just use as is. I also glued a little sentiment strip along the bottom, or you can stamp it directly onto the white die cut. Another thing that I really like about this die that creates this little folder is that if you wanted to, you could just wiggle a gift card behind the note card. So it'll fold around a little note card and a gift card. I plan to do one of these with a gas gift card for my babysitter because gas is just horrendous right now, and then also just have them on hand anytime I need to give a gift. Now I glued those flowers and leaves on with just a little bit of adhesive to make sure they were where I wanted them to be. Once I was certain of the position, I used the fine tip of my bottle to go underneath the die cuts and squeeze in some more liquid adhesive that will dry and hold them all in place. So here I have my multi-inked flowers that I had left over, the ones that have the different color pink petals, and the ones that have the different colors blended towards the center of the flowers. Now these are all ready to go to recipients. If you wanted to, you could glue these onto the front of a card if you like a more traditional card size. So far I showed how to do multi-inking with some solid images. Now let's do multi-inking coloring of outline images. If you struggle with doing blending of markers or colored pencils, this is definitely a technique for you. And as I did before, I'll be showing you a few different ways to do this technique. Now for this, I'll be using the Reverse Confetti Tropical Leaves stamp set and coordinating dies. I really like the set because it could go either playful or more elegant. Totally depends on how you design your card. I'm going for a more graphic or classic feel. Now I'm stamping the leaves onto a piece of Masking Magic, that same masking paper from Gina K Designs. By masking, I'll be able to color in these leaves very quickly. For the first technique I'll share with you, you need to just fussy cut around the outside edge. If you don't like fussy cutting, stay tuned. I'll show you another way to do it. But for these leaves, it definitely didn't take very long, and it was much faster than trying to blend color inside of the leaves using markers, colored pencils, or watercolor. All right, so now I have the 3 leaves that I plan to use on my card in my MISTI stamping tool, and I have some white cardstock. I'm inking up the stamps with VersaMark ink, and I'll stamp those, and then I'll heat emboss this with gold embossing powder. You could definitely just stamp it. You could do embossing, anything you want. I'll show you a few variations. Whenever I do heat embossing, I usually do extras. The advantage of this is 2 things. First, if you mess one up, you have a spare. And second, if you don't mess it up, you could always save it for a future card. So here I have a bunch of leaves that I'm gold heat embossing. Now I'll take the negative space of those masks that I cut and place them around our stamped image. So I'm lining it up with that gold embossed line. When you cut out your mask, I encourage you to cut on the outside edge of the outline image. That will just give you better coverage. All right, so now we can ink over this however we want. I am using, again, Simon Says Stamp inks, the same colors I used before, and a blending brush. And look how quickly I can apply color over that mask. And this will give me quick coloring for these outline images. For me, this is a huge time saver over using markers, colored pencils, or whatever. And you can easily blend between different colors. Once I've filled this in with all the color that I want, making sure I'm overlapping the different colors, I can remove the mask and look at that. I have quickly colored in this image. This is especially useful if you're doing multiple images. You cut the mask once and you can use it on multiple images. So here is one of the other leaves. I just did a dark green towards the center and then a lighter green towards the outside. Takes no time at all. And again, you can use whatever inks you prefer here. If you are wanting to learn more ways to do this masking to color in outline images, I will link to a video up here on the top right. So here I have 3 leaves that I colored in very quickly by creating a mask. I thought I'd show you another way to do multi-inking over a mask, this time for a more graphic look, creating stripes of color. So I have that same mask that I created before, and I'm lining it up over another gold heat embossed image. Now, instead of just inking over this, I'm using a Post-it note to create little stripes of color. So I'm putting my first Post-it note down, and I'll apply color over that. Then I can shift my Post-it note down, add another over the color I've already applied, and create another striped area, and add another color of ink over this. This creates a really fun graphic look, a really unique look. It works best with larger images where you can really see the different colors inside. I use mostly blues and greens, but you could do a rainbow stripe, anything you want. This is another great way to use different inks that you haven't used in a while also. So here I've just masked off different stripes, make sure they overlap. I didn't keep them straight, which is a huge time saver too, and you can create a multicolor image. Now, before I turn those into cards, I do want to show you one way to color your outline images if you don't want to create a fussy cut mask, and that is to just use the coordinating die and add ink on top. This doesn't give the same results, but it's definitely close. So these are white heat embossed leaves that I die cut using the coordinating dies. Now I'm just applying ink over the white heat embossing. The white heat embossing will resist the ink. Now in this case, you will have a little trim of color on the outside edge because, as you know, coordinating dies leave a little trim around the stamped image. But I feel like that's okay in many cases, especially with these leaves. It doesn't really matter. If you want that outside edge to be white, you could go over that outside edge with a white gel pen, but I decided to leave it and I think it works just great. This is definitely the fastest way to color in an outline stamped image. And I really want to say it is up to you which method you like. For me, I like the details in card making. That's what makes me really happy. So doing the mask to get the color right inside of the outline and then the white trim on the outside is what makes me happy. But if you would prefer to do it this way, there's nothing wrong with that. If you prefer to create cards faster or simpler cards, nothing wrong with that. Card making is about joy and whatever makes you happy, so do whatever works for you. Okay, so now I have all of these different leaves and I'm using the coordinating dies to cut them out. So now I have a bunch of leaves. Let's look at the cards that I created. This one I kept very simple. This is the leaf where I put the mask down and then created stripes of color. It looks so cool for a focal point image like this one, anything that's large. Now on the white background, I used that Deco cover plate from Reverse Confetti. Just adds a little bit of interest. I also added a white heat embossed thanks on a black cardstock strip from the Sunny Flower stamp set from the beginning of the video, and a few little gold gemstones for sparkle. And by the way, I forgot to mention, when you cut out a mask, you can save it with the stamp set so you can do this technique in the future. Here is another leaf that I created using the mask and that stripe inking technique. Very simple, very clean cut card, but because we used that special inking technique, it stepped up a little bit. On these next few cards, I used the leaves where I put the mask down over the gold heat embossed outline image, and then just did blending of different greens and blues on top. This is a really fast way to color those outline images. I added it to a note card where I used one of the Reverse Confetti cover plates. I really feel like that detail in the background steps up the card quite a bit. And here is the card where we didn't use the mask. We didn't bother with cutting a mask. Instead, we white heat embossed the leaves, die cut them, and then applied ink over it. So the color is outside the outline of the leaves, but I don't think it really matters. I think it looks fantastic, and it's a definite time saver. I really hope that you try these ideas for getting multicolored stamped images. It's a great way to either save time or get new looks from what you have. Now, I will link to the supplies that I used in my YouTube description below. Also at the end here, I'll link to a couple other videos that may be helpful to you. One of them is from Gina K Designs, where she shows another way to do multi-inked colored images. Thanks for watching. I hope you have an absolutely wonderful week. I appreciate the time you spent here. We'll see you soon.